Science works where you got competition taking place. It's kind of like a free market. So if all you do is simply attack someone else's model without offering any kind of alternative, then you are going to get an angry or a silent response from the scientific community. And as I kind of point out in this chapter, the problem with Christians in this creation-evolution debate typically is they either take a strategy of attacking the opposition or ignoring the opposition rather than engaging the opposition. And you engage them through saying, well, here's our model, and we invite your critique. And, here's where we think our model offers a better explanation. If we're wrong, show us. And here's some places where we think you guys have got a good explanation. It's important that we compliment people with other models where the models are right, because they're not going to be wrong everywhere. And I think Christians often take the perspective that the Darwinists are wrong about everything. Well, they are right that life has been here for 3.8 billion years. And in that sense, we need to offer them a compliment that they have discerned that. They are roughly right on kind of what the history of life looks like over those past 3.8 billion years. Where we have our disagreements is what causes or explains the history of life that we see here on planet Earth. And that's where we can engage them. And from what I can tell from my science peers who take an atheistic perspective, they're open to that kind of engagement because they're hoping to make their models better. And they need critique in order to make that work. Likewise, we need their critique as we try to make our models better. Now, not all atheists are going to respond that way. Some of them are so angry, all they're going to be interested in is attacking your model. I've been involved in university forums where all we get from the atheists is, quote, creation bashing. The shoe can go both ways.
Right. Yeah, so aside from maybe the new atheists, you're suggesting that scientists, even with an evolutionary background, are open to hearing what other models have to say.
At least some are.
Okay.
I mean, there are those out there that really do want to engage on this subject because they are interested in pursuing the truth wherever it may lead. And by the way, that's what God has called us in the Great Commission, to reach out to people who are open to being reached. And there's a lot of them in the scientific community. I think people have the idea that scientists are a monolith of very aggressive, nasty unbelievers, and that's simply not true.
Right. Okay, sounds like you're proposing a pathway to resolution in the next chapter. Is that where we're headed?
Well, in the next chapter, we're going to lay out a tool that's been here for hundreds of years for how to proceed in resolving these kinds of problems. What I do in Chapter 3 here is kind of lay out all the negative stuff that's been getting in the way of resolution. Chapter 4, I'm basically suggesting we need to revive an old tool.
Is that a big hammer? To hit over the head?
No.
Not that kind of tool. Okay.
Well, I mean, I'll tip my hand. What we're talking about is the biblical testing method.
Okay.
The Bible actually tells us how we can proceed to resolve these contentious issues.
All right, look for... Well, Hugh, here we are on the 4th chapter. At the end of the last podcast, you mentioned a tool that Christians can use, and you introduced it as a biblical method, or at least derived from the Bible. Let's talk about that.
Well, it's called in secular society the scientific method.
All right.
But there's an appendix in the book where I document that the scientific method comes from the pages of Scripture and Reformed theology. It's always been in the pages of Scripture, but it took the Reformation, when lay people began to read the Bible for themselves, including scientists, to recognize that there was a methodology in the Bible. I mean, the Bible repeatedly exhorts the reader, put things to the test. I mean, the Apostle Paul, everything must be tested, hold fast to that which is good. Or John, test the spirits to make sure that what they're saying is a truth from God. So this exhortation of test is throughout the whole Bible, Old and New Testament. But the Bible also tells you how to put things to the test. And that was really the birth of the scientific method and the birth of the scientific revolution. I mean, it's no accident that the scientific revolution flowed out of Western Europe at the time of the Reformation.
Now, Hugh, let me stop you there, because if I'm a person out in society and not entirely familiar with Christianity, but skeptical of it, I'm thinking that science, secular science, has owned the scientific method. This is an idea derived from science apart from any religious convictions whatsoever.
Well, that's what I was taught, and I went to public schools in Canada. I mean, I got taught the scientific method every single year from grade 1 through to grade 12, and I grew up with great respect for the scientific method. But I'll tell you this, not one of my public school teachers ever told me where the scientific method came from. It wasn't until after I became a Christian and started reading that 28-volume set put out by Scottish Academic Press that Thomas Torrance, the famous Scottish theologian, had sponsored, that I recognize, hey, and actually it's an obvious thing. I mean, what you do see in the science textbooks is that you go back to 1500s, 1600s, in Western Europe, you got the seeds of the scientific method and the scientific revolution. Well, it's also the time of the Reformation. And so the location and the timing is not a coincidence. So people who are skeptical, they have to at least give cognizance to that fact, that the scientific method took place at the same context of the birth of the Reformation of the Christian church.
And you document this in the book.
Yeah, it's in an appendix of the book, and I also refer them to that 28-volume set if they really want to look at it in all of its gory detail. Probably a lot more detail. Actually, there's a couple of volumes of the 28 that really kind of give you the nub of the research that shows that this is really there. But I also point out in the chapter that if you just look at the Bible passages that deal with chronologies of physical events or relative to creation, you will see the scientific method. I mean, Genesis 1 is a good example. That chapter starts off with a statement of the frame of reference, referring first to the universe and focusing on the surface of the earth. And before you get into the 6 creation days, you not only have the statement of that frame of reference as the surface of the earth, it gives you 4 initial conditions. Well, if you look at any textbook description of the scientific method, step 1 is don't make any kind of interpretation until you first establish the point of view or the frame of reference. Second step is you want to identify the initial conditions. Step 3, you want to note what happens, when, where, and in what order. And that's basically what you see in the 6 creation days of Genesis chapter 1. Then having noted the chronology and what happens, when, and where, you want to know what the final conditions are. And at that point, and only at that point, according to the biblical testing method, aka the scientific method, are you free to form an interpretation. But we call it an hypothesis in science, which means it's a lightly held interpretation. And from a biblical perspective, you do not want to invest a lot of your emotional attachment to that initial interpretation. Step 6 of the biblical testing method is you want to test that initial interpretation with more research, either with looking at other creation accounts in terms of putting Genesis 1 to the test, or in a scientific perspective, you want to make other observations, perform experiments. Often what scientists do is they simply repeat the experiment they've already done because maybe they made a mistake. And they want to try, or they try to do the experiment over again, but with more detailed measurements. So that's one of the ways they can put their interpretation of the test. Step 7 is, having done these additional tests, you want to revise your interpretation accordingly. Now, a lot of lay people think that's the end of the biblical testing method. It's not. Having gone through those 7 steps, you go back to the beginning and say, in light of these 7 steps, did I correctly identify the frame of reference? Maybe I need to make an adjustment. Did I correctly identify the initial conditions? You know, I've said this to audiences before, that the first time I read Genesis 1, I only picked up 3 initial conditions. My second pass through, I found 4 initial conditions.